Ever mindful of the Iraq WMD fiasco, Western nations claim the regime was behind the chemical attack and have made some of their proof and their evidence public. But is it enough? For a closer look at the evidence, with me now are Greg Thielman, a former director at the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Intelligence, and chemical weapons expert Jean Pascal Zanders joining me from Geneva. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Mr. Thielman, let me go to you first. This Russian proposal, if it works out, is that a victory for the very thing that President Obama wants to avoid, and that is the future use of chemical weapons?
We have sought for a long time to get the Russians to be responsible in their role as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They have not been responsive. They have not been willing to even pass press guidance on condemning the use of chemicals in Syria. So a more active Russian role here is very welcome. The Russians are obviously influential with the Syrians. If they can actually get the Syrians to agree to the Chemical Weapons Convention, which they've been disinclined to do for decades, that would also be a very positive step. But this is a testable proposition. In the next few days, Assad could tomorrow say, we will sign the Chemical Weapons Convention, we will let the implementing organization of that treaty send inspectors in.
Mr. Thielman, Mr. Zanders, I want to just play you another little clip of President Assad's interview over the weekend with Charlie Rose about the evidence, and then I want you guys to respond.
In the area where they said the government used chemical weapons, we only had video and we only have pictures and allegations. How can you talk about what happened if you don't have evidences? We're not like the American administration. We're not social media administration or government. We are the government that deal with reality.
Mr. Zanders, obviously President Assad is shielding behind the fact that we have not seen definitive proof being made public that he or his commanders used those weapons or commanded them to be used. What do you think about the evidence that's been made public, and should more of it be made public?
I personally think that more evidence should be made public. Right now we seem to be in a spiral of confirmation bias on the part of a number of Western leaders, and much more can be put on the table without compromising intelligence sources about the nature of the investigations undertaken, how many samples were investigated, how widespread were those samples. I think a lot more can be put on the table to convince international public opinion.
Is there any way, do you think, that some of the transcripts of what they say were intercepts of various commanders talking precisely about these chemical weapons use, is there any way that that can be put out to the public without compromising their intelligence gathering methods?
I think there are quite a number of intercepts that could be published in full. I think also one could say there are a number of soil samples, physiological samples from victims. One could indicate where they come from. They could be indicated how they have been analyzed in the laboratories. And also I think it would be very interesting, very honest actually, to put on the table, look, these are the elements that we've found that point towards chemical weapon use. These are the elements that are not so sure and where we have to make a judgment.
Let me turn to you, Mr. Thielman, because you were an official in the Bush presidency, the W. Bush presidency, at a time when this whole idea of intelligence has been roundly discredited because of the Iraq fiasco. What do you think in this regard? There's endless debate over A, whether a chemical attack happened, and B, who did it. For you, what is crucial here?
I find that two pieces of this extremely convincing. One is the remote sensing data on the muzzle flashes and rocket flashes that show where the attack was launched from. All of that data came from government-held areas. 90 minutes later, we started getting reports of the victims. So that's very convincing to me about who was responsible for this attack. I find also the transcripts convincing, although I agree with Mr. Zanders that more information would be better. The public is very skeptical about this. the whole Iraq WMD fiasco has left the public and the international community skeptical about what the administration says. And therefore, I think we need as much information as we can get. But this is a classic conflict between the intelligence community that wants to protect its ability in the future to get sensitive information.
But to the heart of the matter now, German intelligence, the BND, according to published reports, say that they have no evidence that President Assad himself ordered such attacks, but that they have no doubt that it was a regime attack. I want to ask you to answer that. And also, the longer the Obama administration waits to deliver its response, what is the consequence of the delay in time?
With regard to the German information, in some sense, I think the important thing is that this indicates the Germans are in agreement with the United States that the Assad regime is responsible for this massive chemical attack. I don't know whether the United States has concrete evidence of the personal involvement of Assad in giving the orders, but in his dictatorship and given the understanding of his tight control over chemical weapons use, one would presume that he had a role to play in this. If he did not have a role to play, one would like to see evidence of his arrest of the generals and others who committed this atrocity.
And the consequence of delay?
I think that we are going to be waiting probably until the UN inspector's report comes out. We're obviously waiting for a U.S. congressional debate. It would be a mistake, I think, though, to have an infinite delay. The kind of actions that the Russians have suggested can happen very quickly if Assad is willing to make it happen. And I think that we have to have a decisive response to this attack to avoid what happened historically in the past when the Italians used poison gas in Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, and when Saddam Hussein killed tens of thousands of Iranian civilians and citizens in his own country with massive uses during the 8-year war with Iran. And of course, on that occasion, the United States backed Saddam Hussein.
On that note, Jean Pascal Zanders in Geneva, Greg Thielman, thank you so much for joining me.